So we're continuing on in our series focusing on a book in the Old Testament, the book of Proverbs. And I thought I might just recap what this book is. So Proverbs were collected by the wise men of ancient courts across the Near East in order to provide instruction for their rulers in the art of ruling. They were international in character. Wise men shared their thoughts. In the book of Proverbs that we have, there's actually an Egyptian wisdom book pasted into the middle of it. And the focus was less on spiritual instruction according to the religious beliefs of the various leaders, Babylonian, Egyptian, Israelite, etc., but rather on tried and tested observations from the long experience of being alive. The theory was that adhering to these would likely lead to successful rulership outcomes, whilst disregarding them would likely lead to woe. So Proverbs is meant to be a statement of the pretty obvious, common sense observations emerging from the universal experience of trying to live this life. Whether any of them were written by Solomon, don't know. Pseudepigraphy is a practice whereby people would choose a famous name and put literary works under that name. Solomon may have written some of them, it's not clear, but almost certainly these were used to instruct him, and he's a person who is associated with wisdom. Now the thing is, common sense isn't everything. We need to know the person of Jesus. We need to know the teaching of the Bible. We need to know how the Holy Spirit directs our lives if we want to live lives that bear fruit, if we want to live lives that please God. But also, common sense is not nothing. For example, you may be an expert in the Gospel of Matthew, but lack the self-awareness to understand why you so often offend people in one-on-one conversations. You might be a tremendous worship leader, but not know how to talk to somebody you find attractive. Today, we consider a consistent theme of Proverbs the use of our tongues. As we know from experience, our words have tremendous power. A gentle whisper can completely calm a distressed person. A furious retort can make a lifelong enemy. Words have the capacity to attach themselves as labels: clever, athletic, attractive, cool, thick, useless, ugly, boring. The childhood mantra, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, could not be less true. Words may not leave outward scars in the way that a stone might, but everybody here will have been injured by the use of careless or cruel words. Here was an attempt, which I've always found quite amusing, of somebody to do that to me. I worked for several churches for a year each. In the third one I worked in, I really connected with the leader who had the same disturbed sense of humor as myself. And on the one occasion when I was invited to speak, it was to a small gathering of small group leaders. And it was a way of saying goodbye, really, and thank you for having had me for this year. And so this guy who led the church began by telling some embarrassing stories about me and his experience of me. So I replied in kind, knowing that this kind of thing really amused him. He had a kind of stand-up comedy act with another leader in the church, and they were doing that to each other the whole time. Anyway, this woman steamed up to me and she said, "How dare you be rude about our leader?" And I said to her, "Have you not noticed that he really enjoys that? Otherwise, I wouldn't really have done it. You know, he likes those kinds of jokes. Have you not noticed that this colleague he has makes those jokes all the time?" "Well, he shouldn't. Nobody should be rude about our bishop." And then she said that she had a prophetic word for me, which did worry me straight away because of the tone with which she was going to say it. And it was about a voice problem I'd had that I'd alluded to when I was speaking. She said, this is the word, speak less, listen more. I didn't pay too much attention to that. So positive words may have given us each here the courage to go on, and negative words may have left us on our knees. And this means that our use of language shapes the world we live in. Have you seen those weird experiments where people speak to plants or to molecules of water, and the effect of doing it in an aggressive or kind way has even on the structure of these things? Very peculiar. Is that a thing? It probably is. Yeah, okay, good. I could just have been conned, I regularly am. So this means that our use of language shapes the world in which we live in, which obviously means that God is going to be concerned about how we speak. So here are 4 proverbs that I'm going to seek to explain tonight. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. The eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. The soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. So 4 thoughts on the use of the tongue. First of all, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. So 2 ways of speaking are contrasted. Gentle speaking possesses the power to diffuse wrath, rage, fury. Harsh speaking possesses the power to provoke wrath, rage, fury. Note that the source of these powers is not what is said, but the way in which it's said. Paul expresses the same idea in Colossians 4, verse 6. Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So, knowing how to nuance what we say is part of knowing what to say. Knowing how to say what we want to say will more likely lead to a good outcome. Now, this is a problem for people like me, who like to say what they think as soon as they think it. And they don't really see any particular wisdom in weighing it. They probably trust that they just write it anyway. And it just feels good to think it and say it. I'm married to somebody, I'm married to one person. And basically, if I say to her, what do you think? She will sometimes say, I will go away and think about it. But I'm inviting her in to help me work out what I think about it. I don't know what I think about it until I've interacted with at least 10 other people, especially if it's important. Anyway, so this is a problem for me. The idea that the way in which we say something might actually be tremendously important. After many years and many unintended consequences, I have accepted that what many people have known for many years is actually true. And it's something that you probably already know. But just in case it isn't, this is definitely true. Email is not a good way to resolve a disagreement. Did you all know that? Okay, good. Everything within me wants to use email to do this because having trained as a lawyer, email allows me the time and the space to express exactly what I want to say, to hone my arguments to a point of logical perfection. And I'm here today to confirm that arguments honed to a point of logical perfection rarely lead to peace. I've discovered it's better, which you already knew, better to have a discussion in person so that we can engage as people, as opposed to expecting one of us to engage with a dispassionate thesis. So it might be worth saying to yourself, John, insert your own name if necessary, John, you don't know what to say until you've considered the likely impact of the way in which you're planning to say it. And this is my favorite line from the whole talk, which I'm just going to offer to you for the whole of your life. Are you ready? This is much better than trying to get the tongue train back in long after it's left the mouth station. I'm going to say that again, and you can just thank me for the rest of your life. This is much better than trying to get the tongue train back in long after it has left the mouth station. Isn't that beautiful? It's not from me, but it is beautiful. If only Solomon's son, Rehoboam, had listened to this counsel. Solomon, a seeker of wisdom, had his faults, and one of them was exploiting his people as slave labor to build fabulous palaces. After his death, his son took over, and the people hoped this would provide an opportunity to lighten the load previously imposed on them by Solomon. And they approached Rehoboam, saying, Our father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. What happens next precisely confirms the truth of this proverb. Rehoboam checks with his father's counselors, who advise him to give a favorable answer. He then checks with his friends, who are about the same age as him, and this is the advice they give. Say, my father made your yoke heavy, I will make it heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. So instead of turning away anger and winning the loyalty of his people, he stirred up their wrath, which ultimately led to a rebellion. All he had to do was give a soft answer. Why didn't he? Why don't we? Why don't you? Why don't we give a soft answer? Well, probably because we're contending with our personal favorites, pride and insecurity. Nobody was going to tell him, the new king, what to do. Nobody was going to accuse him of being weak and giving in to the demands of mere slaves. Rehoboam could have listened to his royal advisors and not his friends. They are called wise men for a reason, he could have thought. He could have acknowledged his people's concerns. There are usually two sides to every conflict. He could have asked to meet face to face with their leaders. If he could have worked out a compromise, he could have corrected a wrong. Then they would have respected him for listening to them and gladly continued to serve him, instead of which he provoked a rebellion. I once was asked to meet with a mother and her teenage daughter, and they were at loggerheads about a critical issue, which was what time must the daughter come home after seeing friends or going to parties. The mother said it must be 10 o'clock, and the daughter said it must be 11 o'clock. And I said, what about 10:30? And everybody went away happy. Meeting face to face, hearing each other, being willing to compromise in the interests of peace matters. I mean, if only my counseling experience was always that easy. It really hasn't been, but that was incredible. Common sense says, both to the person in power and to the one seeking a resolution from those in power, take the considerate approach first. Could you do is much better than do. Most of us respond well when we're asked politely. Most of us feel offended and become defensive when spoken to in an abrupt manner. I have to say, I've learned from being with Americans that it is good to call men sir, especially if they are serving you in some way. They're a road sweeper or they work in a restaurant. It's good to call people sir. If we want good outcomes, if we want to be respected, we should learn to speak softly, learn to be considerate, even if our name is John and none of that works for us. It's not about our sense of offense or rights and wrongs of the situation so much as it is about taking time to consider how what we feel we have to say will actually be received. There was a staff member I'm going to see soon called Janie, who's planted a church in Rochdale. And she and I were on the team together when we had actually a lot of conflicts. And I would always discuss these conflicts with her, and she would always ask me the same question, which is, what do you want to get out of the situation? What do you want to get out of the situation? And that irritated me because I just wanted to say how I felt and possibly kill someone. What do you want to get out of the situation? It's the outcome that matters. If we're interested in wisdom, that is wisdom, my friend, to be interested in the outcome. Feel free to remind me of this the next time I ignore it. Most of us anger people from time to time. I mean, some of you probably don't that often. But most of us do, at least from time to time. I once made a pregnant mortgage advisor cry whilst trying to resolve a mistake that her bank had made, which she was kind of trying to deal with the mess concerning. I was then passed on to someone else. They didn't tell me why, but I put two and two together, and then, of course, I had to apologize. What makes you respond in a harsh way? In my case, it might be feeling that I'm being overridden or treated wrongly. Christians will sometimes say, well, Jesus made people angry, and he did. However, you are not Jesus. And the chances are, if we really have angered someone, it will partly be to do with us as well as them. Now, one of the problems with everything I'm saying is it presupposes that we are going to be able to reflect on our own behavior. And one thing I want to acknowledge is that none of us like admitting to making mistakes, but some of us actually find it mortifying. And to use a technical term, these are the esteem-sensitive people of this world. People who learned a very important lesson before they could even speak, which is that their caregiver's love was dependent on them being good. And this sets up a terrible fear in some people of making a mistake or being in the wrong. And such people will go to enormous lengths to avoid a negative verdict on how they have behaved or even on how people associated with them have behaved. But in practice, the thing is, this lacks wisdom because in order to change, we have to be able to honestly look at how we've done, what we've said, how it's impacted people. And that means we have to be able to look within. And the thing is, if we're going to look within, we're definitely going to find failure because failure is part of the true story of every single human life. And I have found that there is a difference between knowing this in theory, that we make mistakes. Oh, we all make mistakes. We all make mistakes. Everybody believes that in theory. But knowing that actually applies to you, especially if you're esteem sensitive, is actually very difficult to bear. So if you find this whole thing particularly excruciating, you're not alone. It's about a third of people. But it is something that's good to work on and become alive to. So if you're an esteem-sensitive person, you will know, because if somebody accuses you of being wrong, whether they're right or not, it's just the worst thing. There are other people, the other two-thirds, for whom other things are the worst thing, but that will be the worst thing for you. And it can lead to a kind of protection, whereby you just never look within, because that might lead to things you don't want to think about. So that can limit your personal development. So just think about making friends with that aspect of yourself, because it's not going to go away. Make friends with it, see the good things in it, that you really want to do the best, you really want to be a person of honesty and integrity. All those things are also true. This is just the shadow side. Anyway, that's Proverb 1. Proverb 2. The tongue of the wise commends knowledge, the mouth of the fool gushes folly. The problem is we are both wise person and fool and wise person. However, it's possible in the area of speech that we are more fool than wise person, and this we should seek to change. The wise know how to benefit others by the use of what they know. The fool may have the same knowledge, but for reasons of ego, self-interest, or lack of self-awareness, turn people away from that knowledge. I wasn't a great fan of lectures when I was at university, and the kind of course I didn't actually require you to go. They were kind of optional. Of course, people went to them, but they were kind of optional. As far as I was concerned, they were definitely optional. What wasn't optional was staying in the library. The reason they were optional is because you get like 10 weeks on one minor theme of an entire thing, and that wasn't time efficient for me. I didn't like studying anyway, and how was I going to get through 1.5 essays a week? So I rarely went to lectures, but I decided to make an exception to hear the leading expert on the book of Romans in the New Testament explain his view of the text, because he was definitely a Christian, because he required everybody to stand and pray before he lectured, and that was quite ballsy, and I like that. However, unfortunately, like Paul, the author of Romans, this guy also failed to complete one sentence before moving on to the next on quite a regular basis. So that meant that one concept in his rambling lecture merged with the next in a highly confusing way. And after an hour, I had absolutely no idea what he thought about anything. I could just have read his book, which quite honestly was much clearer, which I then did. Wise teachers know how to make the exercise of learning interesting, whereas foolish teachers make it a bore. Some people are riveting to listen to in a social context, aren't they? And others are pathologically dull. We seek out the former and we seek to run screaming from the latter. It's knowing how to take people along with you versus not realizing that you're not, due to pomposity, having a boring manner, or spouting rubbish. I remember having an argument with some highly intelligent but seriously uninformed American doctors. We just met, they were dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, and they took it upon themselves to apologize to me, as if I cared, for the fact that Obama had just cancelled a meeting with David Cameron, our then Prime Minister. And somehow, I don't know how, this quickly led into a discussion about guns. And one of them asked me if I knew why Switzerland was not invaded during World War II. I'll just leave you to think about that for a moment. Why was Switzerland not invaded during World War II? I'll tell you what the answer wasn't. It was the answer he gave, which is because they had guns. I couldn't stop myself from retorting, no, it's because they had banks. I was right. On this occasion, he didn't know what he was talking about, despite being a very intelligent person, and made himself foolish. A person who is aware they don't know much about a particular subject and so decides to keep quiet is not a fool. A fool is a person who really doesn't know what they're talking about but goes on and on anyway. I've occasionally taught a very unpopular theory of power in this church based on a very brief conversation I had with some friends. In a nutshell, childhood, no power. Teenagerdom, protest about no power. Young adulthood, power. Prove the point. Do something with what you've got. Find out what your gifts are. Go for it, right? 30, you've done it. This is what people don't like. 30, you've done the most creative phase of your life, and by now you should be passing on what you know. And the theory goes on from there. That's the bit people don't like. As you can imagine, I mean, there are very good reasons for not liking this theory, but I like it. And I particularly like the idea that true creativity belongs to stupidity, which belongs to youth and inexperience. The most creative people I've ever met have also been the least experienced of the four. So to me, this makes perfect sense. It's probably drivel, but it makes sense to me, and I've been saying it to people for a long time. And anyway, I was once explaining this wonderful theory to a couple of friends in Germany. They went rather silent, and then one of them asked me, "Do you remember that we told you that theory? Did you read the book we suggested you read if you wanted to understand it properly?" And the answer to that would be no and no. Pointers for avoiding foolish speech. Don't try to be wise. The wise are not trying. They're caught up in a subject that they really know about. Don't be too quick to speak. I've come to realize professionally there is a lot to be said for being the chair of a meeting. This allows me to raise an issue or present a problem that I simply cannot resolve myself. But as the chair, you're supposed to listen to what everybody else thinks before you speak. And the solution quite often has been obvious by the time it comes to my role as a summarizer of what's been said. And that makes me appear to be wise. Tick. Third proverb, the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. This probably means that ultimately we can trust the Lord to vindicate the goodness of wisdom and the wickedness of folly. We want to ensure that the truth is established and the justice is served. Jesus quotes a proverb, however, that wisdom is justified by her deeds, which probably means that the wisdom of some decisions will only be established over time. As the gospel exploded on the scene in Jerusalem, and the Sanhedrin, the Jewish rulership, was trying to decide what to do about this, Gamaliel, who was part of the Sanhedrin, gave a word of wisdom. He referenced two other leaders who temporarily gathered followers to themselves, but whose careers had caused it to come to nothing. His advice to the Sanhedrin was, leave these men, the disciples, alone, let them go. If their purpose is of human origin, it will fail. If it's from God, you will not be able to stop them, and you will only find yourself fighting against God. That's in Acts 5, verse 38. Sadly, they disregarded this advice, but that was a word of wisdom. Final proverb, the tongue that brings healing is a tree of life, but a deceitful or a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. I listen to TalkSport. It's one of the things I feel obligated to do. And basically, I'd been moved by an advert on this radio show called Race for Life, in which a young woman explains who she's running for. And it's her mother who has cancer. She describes her mother as her strongest encourager and her greatest cheerleader. What a testimony to have. Do you not think? Her mother has the tongue of healing, uttering the word that helps someone see something in a new and hopeful light. The word that brings insight into why a painful situation has arisen. The word that brings comfort and relief. The word that dials down an angry room. It's our privilege to be bringers of life in these ways by the use of our tongue. As I said, the irony of the human condition is the same person who brings life in one context can also bring death in another. Isn't it true that sometimes we speak with the active intention of doing harm? We embellish a story of failure to condemn someone. We misrepresent someone because we want the person we're talking to agree with us. We pass on gossip because it's just too juicy not to say it. We do these things because somebody's hurt us, because we're judgmental, or we feel threatened by people. And all of this is folly. A heart that desires healing will bring forth words of life. A heart that desires the satisfaction of itself will bring forth words of death. It's the heart that matters. We regularly need to pray with the psalmist, create in me a clean heart, renew a right spirit within me. As Serene said last week, for those who are able to understand her, I'm joking. The only way to grow in behaviors that are true is to turn from behaviors that are false, to experience a transformation of our hearts by the power of the Spirit as we draw near to Jesus. So we are who we are. Our heart will always be what it is until we come into the presence of one who is utterly unlike us. There's a verse in the Bible where Isaiah says of God, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are not your ways, says the Lord. And the sense in which his thoughts are not our thoughts and his ways are not our thoughts, his ways are not our ways, is that God will show mercy. He will show mercy. As was mentioned earlier in the prophetic words, God will continually show mercy. He will continually show mercy to people like you, whose tongue is furred and roughened through poor use. He'll make it soft and clean and nice. He will. He'll give it wisdom. He'll coat it with sweetness. He can do that. He can change anything, and he will. And he's interested in you. He's not interested in condemning you. He's interested in drawing you close, drawing you close, drawing you close until you become a bit more like him, until in the end you're fully like him. We are always going to express what our hearts are full of. That's simply a fact. Therefore, our one hope of not giving expression to the fullness of our broken selves is to dwell in the presence of and be filled with the Spirit of the one unbroken self. And that's why we pray for people at the end of our services every single week. You know, I've probably said this to you, but just in case I haven't, I used to say it a lot. Even if the appeal is for pregnant one-legged women, it's quite wise to come forward for prayer. Do you know what I mean? Even if you're like not pregnant, you've got both legs. It's still good to come forward for prayer, because prayer changes people. Being prayed for, asking the Spirit to come right in at the center, changes people. You don't have to say the horrors that you want changed. You can just come forward and people will pray for you. It's an incredibly, freeing deal, isn't it? We come as we are and God meets us. So would you like to stand?